This bay is the perfect breeding ground for Chinese horseshoe crabs. In the darkness, a new life struggles to break through its first barrier. It's only about 8 millimeters. Tens of thousands of new lives come into the world one by one. It will be 8 months before they grow long tails like their parents and transform from a trilobate larva into a true horseshoe crab. Over the next 15 years or so, these young horseshoe crabs will have to molt 18 times to reach sexual maturity. Less than 1 in 1,000 will return to the bay. Shrinking breeding grounds and overfishing by humans are hastening the disappearance of Chinese horseshoe crabs. After living on Earth for hundreds of millions of years, this ancient species is now in unprecedented danger. The environment in areas where the sea meets the land is complex and diverse. To survive here, some animals have had to come up with ingenious strategies. It's June in Bohai Bay. A few tenacious creatures are hiding in the shingle beach in the coastal salt fields. 3 bird eggs in the rubble are disguised as rocks. These flies all over the salt field are food for the Kentish plover. But the female is protecting the nest and doesn't dare to leave. The high temperatures pose a deadly threat to her unhatched eggs. The ground temperature is rising fast, and the male is busy feeding itself. As the sun sets, the female goes out on a final hunt before it gets dark. A guard dog in the salt field smells the food. The Kentish plover couple keep looking for their eggs. They refuse to leave. A new day begins. Because there are fewer female Kentish plovers than there are males, they have to mate with as many males as possible before the end of the breeding season to to produce more offspring. The pool is not only used for bathing and foraging, but also for socializing. A new love silently blossoms. Female has found a mate. Together they search for a nesting spot. They must find the ideal pebbles to camouflage the nest. Brings new hope. The cycle can start over again. The male is exhausted and starving, but will never leave. However, the outlook is grim. Average, only one egg out of 80 will successfully reach adulthood. The couple have to hold out for 30 days. This parent's patience finally pays off. There is no paradise in nature. And even in places where food is abundant, survival remains the top priority. A tropical coral community in the South China Sea is full of life and danger. The mantis shrimp has separate eyeballs and pupils. This allows it to be alert to potential threats from different directions. It's also a lethal fighter. Although it weighs less than 30 grams, it can throw a punch with forces thousands of times its weight in 2/1000th of a second. But it only uses its iron fist in self-defense and hunting. Building a proper shelter is more important than anything else. For the mantis shrimp, the most effective method of survival is hiding in crevices, a skill it has refined over 200 million years. The octopus and mantis shrimp are known as the architects of the ocean. It must always be ready to defend its territory. Larger territory often means a greater chance of survival. The Gulf has rich resources, but limited space. As a result, different species sometimes work together, and the same species often compete with each other. Victory will require strength and courage. With that, we come to the end of this edition of Selfie. We'll continue with the audio segment of the 6-episode documentary titled The Blue World, produced by CHN. I'm Tony Reed. Thanks for listening. From epic tales of mystery and magic to accounts of battle and empire. From the verses of the ancient poets to the masterpieces of our times. CRI brings to life China's literary heritage. Join us for A Light on Literature.
Today, in A Light on Literature, CRI continues its presentation of The Rape of Nanking, an account of terrors inflicted by the Japanese military beginning in 1937 in China's capital city at the time. The book, completed in 1997, documents what Chinese-American author Iris Chang calls the forgotten Holocaust of the 20th century. Listeners will certainly find it shocking. Today, Ian Reid narrates episode 22 of The Rape of Nanking, in which John Robber is arrested by Hitler's secret police.
Although the foreigners who organized the Nanking Safety Zone sacrificed their energy and health to help the Chinese in Nanking, many of these Westerners never quite got what they deserved from life or posterity. There are no famous books devoted to these forgotten heroes of World War II, and certainly there has been no movie about them that has captured the imagination of the world public as intensely as Schindler's List. Their spirit lives mainly in a few archives and attics, from Berlin to Sunnyvale, and in the minds of a handful of survivors in China, who remember them simply as the living Buddhas who saved Nanking. Most of the Nanking survivors know the deeds of the safety zone leaders, but few are aware of how their lives ultimately played out. The survivors I talked with in China were saddened to learn that some of their protectors eventually endured disgrace and expulsion from China, interrogation and ostracism in their home countries, and irreparable physical and mental wounds, even suicide. Several of these foreign heroes can be considered the belated victims of the Rape of Nanking. The experiences of Minor Searle Bates and Louis Smythe illustrate how the facts of their heroism during the Nanking Massacre were twisted for political ends. During the Korean War, the PRC distorted the history of the massacre in newspaper articles to depict the Americans as the villains of Nanking, who assisted the Japanese in the carnage. In the local newspaper, Louis Smythe saw articles that accused the safety zone foreigners of giving over the city to the Japanese and turning over thousands of women for raping. In a similar vein, an article in the National Xinhua Yuebao charged that the Americans who remained in Nanking in 1937 not only responded well to the imperialist policies of the U.S. government, but also protected their companies, churches, schools, and residences with the blood and bones of the Chinese people. The author insisted that the International Safety Zone Committee was an organization of imperialists who worked in faithful collusion with the Japanese invaders, and he quoted one Chinese survivor as saying, "The American devils called out the names and the Japanese devils carried out the execution." Pictures of the atrocities were printed with the slogan, "Remember the Nanking Massacre. Stop American remilitarization of Japan." Such propaganda shocked and frightened Smythe, though his Chinese teacher assured him of his safety. "Dr. Smythe, there are 100,000 people in this city who know what you people did." The teacher said, "There's nothing to worry about." Nevertheless, his days in Nanking were numbered. In 1951, he left his position at Nanking University to join the faculty of Lexington Theological Seminary in Kentucky the following year. Bates also left Nanking, but not before he had been placed under virtual house arrest by the communists. Smythe and Bates did not suffer as much as some of their colleagues. For several committee members, the massacre took years off their lives. David McGee, son of the Reverend Jenny Gillespie McGee, is certain that the stress of dealing with the Japanese caused the early death of his father. Other zone leaders endured years of mental agony. For example, Edith Fitch Swap, the daughter of the YMCA secretary George Fitch, said her father had been so traumatized by the Japanese atrocities in Nanking that he often suffered complete amnesia when delivering lectures on the subject. This happened at least twice when Fitch spoke about the Sino-Japanese War in front of large organizations in the United States. Robert Wilson, the Nanking University Hospital surgeon, paid the price of Nanking with his health. His widow recalls that while other doctors on the zone committee carefully paced themselves and went to Shanghai at least once a week to catch up on sleep, Wilson recklessly worked non-stop without taking breaks. Surgery consumed most of his energy during the day, while Japanese soldiers interrupted his sleep at night when he was called away from home time and again to stop a rape in progress. He operated, it seemed, on adrenaline alone. Finally, his body rebelled. In 1940, violent seizures and even the mental collapse forced Wilson to return to the United States, where he rested for a year in Santa Barbara, California. He never returned to China, nor did he fully recover from the strain. In the United States, Wilson not only endured both seizures and nightmares, but also experienced trouble focusing his eyes in the morning. Minnie Vautrin paid the price with her life. The Nanking massacre took a deeper psychic toll on her than any of the other zone leaders or refugees had realized at the time. Few were aware that under a legend that had grown to mythic proportions was a vulnerable, exhausted woman who never recovered, either emotionally or physically, from daily exposure to Japanese violence. Her last diary entry, dated April 14, 1940, reveals her state of mind. I'm about at the end of my energy, can no longer forge ahead and make plans for the work, for on every hand there seem to be obstacles of some kind. I wish I could go on furlough at once, but who will do the thinking for the course? 2 weeks later, she suffered a nervous breakdown. At the bottom of the last page of her diary is a sentence that was written, no doubt, by somebody else. In May 1940, Miss Vautrin's health broke, necessitating her return to the United States. Her niece recalls that Vautrin's colleagues sent her back to the States for medical help, but during the voyage across the Pacific Ocean, she tried repeatedly to kill herself. A friend who accompanied Vautrin could barely restrain her from jumping over the side of the ship. Once in the United States, Vautrin entered a psychiatric hospital in Iowa, where she endured electroshock treatment. Upon her release, Vautrin went to work for the United Christian Missionary Society in Indianapolis. Her family in Shepherd, Michigan, wanted to visit Vautrin, but she discouraged them by writing that she would be coming to see them soon. A fortnight later, Vautrin was dead.
You're listening to A Life on Literature, CRI's presentation of outstanding literature about China. Today's narration by Ian Reid is from The Rape of Nanking by Iris Chang, an account of terrors inflicted by the Japanese military beginning in 1937 in China's capital city at the time.
On May 14, 1941, a year to the day she left Nanking, Vautrin sealed the windows and doors of her home with tape, turned on the gas, and committed suicide. Then there was the fate of John Rabe, whose life remained a mystery to historians for years. Before he was summoned back to Germany, Rabe had promised the Chinese in Nanking that he would publicize the Japanese atrocities in his homeland and try to seek an audience with Hermann Goering and even Adolf Hitler. People in Nanking prayed that Rabe's presentation would compel Nazi leaders to exert pressure on the Japanese government to stop the carnage.
Before Raber's departure, a Chinese doctor had asked Raber to tell the Germans that the Chinese were not communists, but peace-loving people who wanted to live in harmony with other nations. After a round of tearful farewell parties in February 1938, Raber departed for Germany with a copy of John McGee's film of the Nanking atrocities. After that point in time, he vanished from all the records, and his whereabouts baffled scholars for decades. I was determined to get to the bottom of the story for two reasons. First, the irony of a kind-hearted Nazi working with American missionaries to save Chinese refugees from Japanese soldiers was too intriguing for me to ignore. And second, I was convinced that something terrible must have happened to Raber after he returned to Germany. Raber, after all, did not appear at the International Military Tribunal of the Far East to testify with his colleagues about the horrors of Nanking. Also, an oral history interview with one of his friends indicated that Raber had somehow run afoul of Hitler's government. But the friend failed to provide specific details, and by the time I came across the transcript, he was no longer alive to give me the full story. Questions nagged me at every turn. Did Raber actually show the film and the report to Hitler? Or did he, God forbid, get sucked deeper into the Nazi machinery in Germany and contribute to the extermination of the Jews? This I highly doubted, given his record of heroism at Nanking, but the possibility remained. Perhaps he had been thrown in prison after the war, or perhaps no one had ever heard from him again because he became a fugitive from the law, living out his remaining years in a Latin American country. I also wondered whether he had kept a personal diary of the Nanking massacre. But if he kept such papers, they must have been destroyed during the war, incinerated perhaps in an air raid. Otherwise, any such diary should have ended up in archives by now, available to the rest of the world. Still, I figured that it would not hurt to write some letters to Germany to see what I could find. I possessed one important clue about Raber. He had been apprenticed in Hamburg around the turn of the century. Perhaps he had been born there and still had family in the city. Somehow, I had to establish contact with a key source in Hamburg. I turned to an old friend for help. John Taylor, whom scholars called a national treasure, had worked more than half a century at the National Archives in Washington, D.C., and knew just about every serious historian in the world. If there was an expert somewhere on the planet who had studied the history of the German community in China during World War II, Taylor would probably know who he was. Taylor suggested that I contact the historian Charles Burdick of Ferndale, California. Burdick in turn suggested that I write to the city historian of Hamburg. He also gave me the address of Martha Begermann, a friend of his, and he assured me a lovely lady who was not only well connected in the city, but generous with her help. Within a few days, I wrote to Begermann about the Raber mystery, as well as to the editor of the largest newspaper in Hamburg, hoping that the latter would run a notice about my search. Then, expecting no immediate reply from either of them, I turned my attention to other things. To my surprise, a letter came back from Begermann right away. Through a fortuitous chain of events, she had already located Raber's family. "I am happy I could help you, and it was not so very difficult," she wrote on April 26, 1996. First of all, I wrote to Pastor Müller in Bavaria, who collected the whereabouts of all former Germans in China. He promptly rang me up the other day, telling me the names of Dr. Otto Raber, son of John Raber, and Otto's sister Margareta. She enclosed in her letter a message from Ursula Reinhardt, Raber's granddaughter in Berlin. From that moment on, things moved swiftly. Ursula Reinhardt, I learned, had been born in China. As a little girl, she even visited Nanking only months before the city fell. She was Raber's favorite granddaughter. To my delight, Reinhardt proved endlessly helpful to my inquiries, and sent me many long letters. With handwritten text, photographs, and news articles, Reinhardt filled in some of the missing details of Raber's life.
China Radio International presents A Light on Literature, a journey through the great works of fiction, poetry, history, and biography that define China's unique cultural gift to the world.
Raber kept his promise to the Chinese that he would inform the German authorities of the Japanese horrors in Nanking. On April 15, he and his wife returned to Germany, where he received numerous accolades for his achievements. In Berlin, the German Secretary of State officially commended Raber for his work in China. Raber was awarded the Service Cross of the Red Cross Order. In Stuttgart, he was further decorated, receiving the Silver Poster for Service to Germany Award and the Diamond Order Award on a red, white, and blue necklace from the Chinese government. That May, Raber publicized the Nanking massacre by lecturing and showing John McGee's film all over Berlin, speaking before packed audiences at the Siemens Company, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Association for the Far East, and the War Ministry. Raber failed to secure an audience with Adolf Hitler, however, and so on June 8 he sent a letter to the Führer, along with a copy of the film and a typewritten report on the rape of Nanking. But if Raber had expected a sympathetic response from Hitler, he was gravely mistaken. A few days later, 2 members of the Gestapo's secret police arrived on his doorstep to arrest him. Ursula Reinhardt was there when it happened. She was 7 years old, trying on a pair of new roller skates near the door, when she saw 2 official-looking men in black uniforms with white lapels take Raber away to a waiting car. My grandfather looked embarrassed, and the 2 men very severe and stiff, so that I didn't even dare hug him farewell. Raber was interrogated for several hours at Gestapo headquarters. The Gestapo released him only after his employer, Karl Friedrich von Ziemann, vouched for his character and promised them that Raber would refrain from talking of the Japanese so openly. Raber was warned never to lecture, discuss, or write on the subject again, and most of all, never to show John McGee's film to anyone. After Raber's release, the Siemens Company immediately sent him abroad, probably for his own protection. For the next few months, Raber worked in Afghanistan, helping German nationals leave the country by way of Turkey. In October, the German government returned his report, but kept the copy of John McGee's film. Raber never found out whether Hitler read the report or saw the film, although his family today is convinced that he did. The German government informed Raber that his report was sent to the Ministry of Economics, where it was read by the highest circles of government, but that he should not expect any change in German foreign policy toward Japan because of it. The next few years proved nightmarish for Raber. His apartment was bombed out, and the Russian invasion of Berlin reduced his family to poverty. Ursula Reinhardt is convinced that they survived only because they were living in the British, not the Soviet section of Berlin. Raber continued to work sporadically for the Siemens Company, translating economic correspondence into English, but the low wage was barely enough to keep his family alive. The immediate post-war period for Raber must have been one long string of angry accusations. First, he was arrested by the Soviets, who interrogated him for 3 days and nights before the unrelenting glare of Klieg lights. Then he was arrested by the British, who grilled him for an entire day, but later gave him a work permit. The permit, however, had little value for Raber because the Siemens Company still did not have a permanent position for him. The final humiliation came when a German acquaintance denounced Rabe and propelled him into a long, drawn-out denazification process. He had to pay for his own legal defense, in the process losing his work permit and depleting his savings and energy. Crowded into one tiny room with his family, fighting cold and hunger, Rabe was forced to sell, piece by piece, his beloved collection of Chinese artwork to the American army in order to buy beans, bread, and soap. Malnutrition caused him to succumb to skin disease, while sorrow and stress all but destroyed his health. In Nanking, he was a legend, but in Germany, he was a dying man. Excerpts from Rabe's diary reveal his state of mind in 1945 to 46. There is no job for me at Siemens. I am unemployed. According to the military government, I must give my standard life policies to be registered in Spandau, a district in the northwest of Berlin, at the Stadtkontorbank. The policies of over 1,027.19 pounds, the rest of 5,000, for which I worked and saved so many years, are with Gretel. Margareta, his daughter, in Bunda. As far as I can see, this money is lost now. Last Sunday, I was with Mommy, Dora Rabe, John Rabe's wife, in the Jantener Strasse, Rabe's bombed apartment. They broke the door in our cellar and stole my typewriter, our radio, and more. Mail, faxing. Now Mommy weighs only 44 kilograms. We have grown very meager. The summer comes to an end. What will winter bring? Where will we get fuel, food, and work? I am now translating Timperley's What War Means, a book of documents about the Nanking Massacre. At the moment, this brings no money, but perhaps I shall get a better food ration card. All Germans suffer as we do. We suffer hunger and hunger again. I had nothing to tell, so I didn't write down anything. In addition to our meager meal, we ate acorn flour soup. Mommy collected the acorns secretly in autumn. Now, as the provisions come to an end, day after day we ate stinging nettle. The young leaves taste like spinach. Yesterday, my petition to get denazified was rejected. Though I saved the lives of 250,000 Chinese people as the head of the International Committee of the Nanking Safety Zone, my request was refused because I was for a short time the leader of the Ortsgruppenleiter district of the NSDAP in Nanking, and a man of my intelligence must not have sought membership of this party. I am going to appeal. If they don't give me any possibility to work at SSW, the Siemens Schuckert-Werke, the name of Rabe's company, I don't know what to live on. So I must go on to fight. And I am so tired. At the moment, I'm questioned every day by the police.
And that was episode 22 of The Rape of Nanking, written by Iris Chang, narrated by Ian Lee, and broadcast on China Radio International. Join us next time in A Light on Literature, when the author discovers John Rabe's secret diaries on the Nanking Massacre. And if you missed anything, be sure to check out our website at www.crienglish.com and click the link for A Light on Literature.
You've heard of Shakespeare. You're acquainted with Charles Dickens. You may even know the Odyssey of Homer. But have you read the great Tang Dynasty poets of China? Or heard the epic tales of the Monkey King? Or the great battles of the Three Kingdoms? These and more are brought to you in A Light on Literature, your journey through the fertile imaginations of China's writers, poets, and historians, only on CRI. 要学汉语. I want to learn Chinese.
其实并不难 ，It can be fun.
欢乐汉语 Chinese Studio.
Welcome to a brand new week on Chinese Studio. 我是 Cam.
And 我是亚杰. Cam, we had a great time last week. So this week, we're going to talk about sightseeing.
Yeah, that sounds pretty good. Let's check out keywords of the day.
Keywords of the day. Where are the sights to see in Beijing? 北京有哪些景点? The Great Wall, 长城. The Forbidden City, 故宫. The Summer Palace, 颐和园. You must visit the Great Wall. 你一定要去长城看看. All in today's Chinese Studio. As you heard in Keywords of the Day, 北京有哪些景点? What are the sights to see in Beijing?
北京有哪些景点?
Beijing is the Mandarin for Beijing.
北京有
The third one means there is something.
有
哪些? Which one?
哪些
景点 Scenic spot.
景点?
北京有哪些景点?
北京有哪些景点? What are the sights to see in Beijing? 北京有哪些景点?
北京有很多景点，比如故宫、长城、颐和园等等。
Yeah, Jim, what's the Chinese for the Great Wall? I know I've heard it many times, but I keep forgetting.
Well, the Great Wall is definitely a place visitors must see. It's pronounced 长城.
长城.
Chang means long, and Cheng means wall. Together it's 长城.
Okay, the Great Wall, 长城.
You know, the Great Wall of China, also known as the Great Wall of 10,000 Li, or about 5,000 kilometers, was enlisted as a World Heritage Site by UNESCO in 1987. It is one of the 7 modern wonders of the world.
Yes, it's a fantastic place to visit. And one other place I'd like to see is the Forbidden City.
故宫, the Forbidden City.
故宫. And another on my list is the Summer Palace.
颐和园 means the Summer Palace.
颐和园.
And 颐和园 is the largest imperial garden in China.
Great, I can't wait to check that out. Now, yeah, the Great Wall is Changcheng, the Forbidden City is Gugong, and the Summer Palace is 颐和园, right?
Very good. 故宫、长城、颐和园。你一定要去长城看看。
Ooh, what does that mean?
Just like what I mentioned, the Great Wall is must. Let's take a look at the sentence. 你 is you.
你
一定要 must.
一定要
去 to go to.
去
长城 the Great Wall.
长城
看看 to take a look at or visit.
看看。
你一定要去长城看看。
我一定要去长城看看。I must visit the Great Wall. 都说不到长城非好汉。
是啊，你一定要去长城看看。Keywords reminder. Where are the sights to see in Beijing? 北京有哪些景点？The Great Wall, 长城. The Forbidden City, 故宫. The Summer Palace, 颐和园. You must visit the Great Wall. 你一定要去长城看看。
Well, we've run out of time already, so let's get to our question du jour. How do you say you must visit the Summer Palace in Chinese? Well, can you try? I guess so. 有理
China Plus Radio, connecting you with China and the world.
The following program is a recording of a live broadcast transmitted 7 a.m. Beijing time. Examining the events that impact and shape China and the rest of the world. This is the Beijing Hour, 1 hour of news and information brought to you every weekday. Now here's your host.
Shane Bigham with you on this Tuesday, February the 16th, 2021. You're listening to the Beijing Hour, live from the Chinese capital. On today's holiday version of the program, China congratulated the new leader of the World Trade Organization, the first woman and the first African to hold the job. The first batch of Chinese-made COVID vaccine has arrived in Zimbabwe. The WHO says a health campaign against an Ebola outbreak in Western Africa is now underway.
I'm pleased to say that vaccination started today in DRC, and so far, 48 people have been vaccinated out of 149 eligible contacts.
Hamburg, Germany's increasingly important position in China-Europe trade. In the second half of the hour, we'll have a special holiday version of our Footprints program. Now today's top story. China congratulated Nigeria's Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala after she was appointed Director General of the World Trade Organization. She's the first woman and first African to lead the WTO. An official statement says Okonjo-Iweala has long been engaged in poverty reduction in developing countries and work related to vaccines and healthcare. The Commerce Ministry says China is fully confident that the WTO will resume its normal functioning soon and play a greater role in anti-pandemic cooperation and economic recovery. The ministry also says China hopes that the new WTO chief will help to advance necessary reforms for the organization and strengthen the authority and effectiveness of the multilateral trading system. With more on this, Shelley spoke to Martina Fuchs, a business analyst based in Zurich and London.
What do you think are the major challenges to the new Director General of the World Trade Organization?
Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala has made history today by becoming the first ever woman and African to lead the 26-year-old WTO. But whether or not she can get the job done is another story. Challenges range from reform pressures to rising protectionism and, of course, the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression because of COVID-19. The most pressing reforms are the WTO's three major functions of dispute settlement, multilateral trade negotiations, and trade policy. This may also involve a painful, comprehensive, and large-scale restructuring and reorganization. The WTO's dispute settlement body is currently paralyzed. The operating body, which is considered as the Supreme Court for global trade disputes, is supposed to have 7 sessions and needs a minimum of 3 sessions to function. Now, he told me a couple of months ago that fixing the dispute settlement system was one of his top priorities. And of course, the WTO, which has 164 members, also has to stay relevant in the 21st century, meaning adapt to new digital technologies and digital trade.
How can she help safeguard the interests of developing countries in a multilateral trade law system?
This is a very important point, where the conflict has been widely seen as a positive sign for multilateralism, and that the multilateral trading system could be restored. But we need to rebuild trust and confidence in a global trade system that has become more fragmented and less fair. She has pledged to give a bigger voice to developing countries, including them more in global trade, and to support emerging economies. Also, for example, of course, to give them better access to COVID-19 vaccines. She will also have to help bridge the digital divide between developing and developed countries for a more sustainable and inclusive global recovery. The WTO in October forecast a 9.2% plunge in the volume of world trade for 2020, followed by a 7.2% rise this year. To achieve this, we really need more and better cooperation between the developed world and emerging economies. So let us hope that she and the WTO really can deliver.
And that was Martina Fuchs, a business analyst based in Zurich and London, talking about the priorities for the new WTO chief.
The first shipment of China's Sinopharm vaccine has arrived in Zimbabwe as the country prepares to kick off its COVID-19 vaccination campaign this week. Garrett Jr. reports.
The second of thousands vaccine doses donated by China arrived at Harare's Robert Mugabe International Airport early Monday morning. Zimbabwean Vice President Constantino Chiwenga says the donation is a testament to the long-standing friendship between China and Zimbabwe. He says the vaccine gives the country hope.
We received this vaccine as a team of work to the nation that finally we may be on the verge of returning to some semblance of normal. The vaccine also offers the possibility that our people who have borne the burn of the economic realities of the pandemic might finally show a new face following the unfortunate interruption of the economic activities that have been necessitated by the need to contain the spread of the virus.
This is the first batch of the COVID-19 vaccine that China has donated to Zimbabwe. Chinese Ambassador Joseph to making its COVID-19 vaccines accessible to developing countries.
China is expected to make that as soon as our vaccine is developed, we will make sure it becomes a global public good. So we will keep our promise to ensure the accessibility and affordability of Chinese vaccine to the developing countries.
At a handover ceremony held at Zimbabwe's State House on Monday, Zimbabwean President Emerson Mnangagwa told China's leadership in fighting against the coronavirus on a global level.
It testifies of the commendable leadership role that the people in of China will continue to play in global efforts to combat the spread of the virus.
Zimbabwe has reported over 35,000 COVID-19 infections since March last year. The country is planning to vaccinate at least 10 million people, or 60% of its overall population. The Zimbabwean government aims to acquire 1.8 million COVID-19 vaccine doses from China. It has purchased another 600,000 doses of the Sinopharm vaccine, which are expected to be delivered early next month. The vaccine is expected to be approved by the country's regulator later this week before it's distributed to vaccination centers across the country. A nationwide vaccination campaign will kick off this week with healthcare workers, elderly people, and those with underlying health conditions first in line to get the shot. For the Beijing Hour, I'm Gao Jia, reporting from Harare, Zimbabwe.
China's CHN probe has adjusted its orbit around Mars to ensure its trajectory passes the poles of the red planet. The probe successfully entered Mars orbit last Wednesday. It will perform several more orbital adjustments to enter a parking orbit. A landing on Mars is expected in May or June. With more on China's Mars mission, Zheng Chao spoke to Associate Professor Deng Fan with the Astronomy Department of Beijing Normal University.
So what's the purpose of this orbital adjustment?
There are several main reasons. One is the change of information. Because Mars is like Earth, its own rotation, the axis of rotation, is roughly perpendicular to the plane on which the planet orbits the Sun. The approaching Mars is obviously on that plane. And when it gets captured, it's basically on that plane. Then it gets about 50 degrees angle. So we find the probe enters the Mars orbit around its equator, and it's rotating around Mars above its rotation. So that's why you can really scan Mars and eventually once you rotate it, and then you're looking at on top of it, the middle of the sphere, then you just pass over the middle of the sphere, right? But if you are rotating around the sphere in a vertical direction, up and down, then because the sphere underneath you is rotating, then you will be scanning across different angles of the surface. And time-giving part. But this is essentially the Internet of International Change is for that matter because the orbiter wants to make a survey of Mars' surface, essentially using its ground-penetrating radar to look for water ice and look at the polar cap, the carbon dioxide, dry ice over there, which is important for studying the Mars. You have to do this. And also maneuver from the furthest point to Mars from around 400 kilometers to something like 265 kilometers. So you can take a much closer look at Mars.
So what do we need to have before the final landing?
So this is the first maneuver.